Welcome back to the Human Resource Academy channel, guys, with yet another educational video on some of the most important aspects of the human resource management discipline. We hope you enjoy it. The next topic that we need to discuss, and it's an extremely important topic, is the topic of demographics. Now, for year 3 students, especially those of you who have already taken some marketing related courses, the topic of demographics is topic that they have probably covered in the past and they understand to some extent. For all other students who are either grade 1 or year 1 or year 2, demographics is probably a new topic, but if you are going to major in HRM, this is an extremely important topic. Just like human resource management deals with people in a simple sense, so is the case of demographics. Now, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, demographics deals with the number and characteristics of people who live in a particular area or form a particular group. In very simple English, demographics is the study of population. Why is demographics important to the human resource management field? Is again because it deals with people just like HRM does. So, in order for you to better understand what demographics focuses on, in this particular slide I have presented 6 of the most common demographic categories, starting with age. As I said many a times, what we are here mainly interested in is the age distribution. For instance, the percentage of people aged between 0 and 15, between 15 and 65, and 65 or over. Gender is another very important thing that we want to look at, so the female to male ratio. Simply put, in some countries we have more men than women, and in other countries it's the other way around. Next thing that we want to look at is race. Why race is important, especially nowadays due to globalization. In particular parts of the world or regions inside the countries, there are so many people from different backgrounds and cultures living together. If we are marketeers or even if we are HRM specialists, this may be relevant to us. Next thing that we want to look at is marital status. In simple English, we want to look at the percentage of people who are married, divorced, or single. Another very important aspect of demographics is the number of children families or women have. So this more or less also has to do with the next category, which is birth rate. Of course, there are some other important categories, but these 6 ones I hope provide a very good background or understanding in terms of what demographics really or actually studies. Now, I don't really know about you, but whenever I want to learn more about a particular country, a place that maybe I'm considering going to in the near or far future, I would usually go on Wikipedia, type the name of the country, and then read about it. Usually, if you use Wikipedia, one of the first things that you get on the right-hand side of your screen would be some information about the population or the so-called demography of the country. In this particular case, I've used Vietnam as an example, and I've actually relied on a different source, not Wikipedia, for a great number of reasons. But anyways, the first thing I would usually look at is the total number of people living in the country. So in the case of Vietnam, we have almost 98 million people. Next thing probably I'm interested in is whether the population is growing or declining. In the case of Vietnam, we have a growing population still. I say still because in the next couple of years, population probably will start declining. And what we also can find out is that actually Vietnam has one of the largest populations in the world. Globally, the country is ranked 15th. Another thing that I may be actually interested in is the so-called life expectancy. Now, this more or less has to do with the number of years people live. So, for both females and males, the average life expectancy is slightly less than 76 years. What, however, is interesting, and it's not only unique to Vietnam, is the fact that females usually live longer than males. In the case of Vietnam, the difference is more than 8 years. So women in Vietnam usually live about 8 years longer than men. Another thing that I probably might be interested in is the mortality rates for infants or babies, newly born children, and let's say children under the age of 5. Now, overall, this is some very important information that we, again, as I said before, we may want to look at regardless of whether we are HRM or marketing specialists. So, having already looked at some of the main categories regarding demographics, the next important thing that we need to look at is some of the most important developments with reference to changing demographics that have been taking place around the world. First, we should emphasize that the global population continues to grow. In 2019, global population stood at about 7.7 billion people. At the same time, in certain parts of the world, a number of countries are experiencing a severe population decline. We will talk about this in the next slides. Another thing that we must look at is the so-called aging population trend. For instance, in year 2019, the population over 65 years of age was about 9%, and in 2030 it is expected that it will grow by another 3%, and by 2100, so in 8 years from now, the global population of age 65 or over will be about 23% already. Now, this actually is a very important development that we will need to consider as human resource specialists. Why and how is a topic that we are going to have a look at within the next couple of slides. Another very important thing that we also have to look at is the reforms in education in terms of both quality and accessibility. Overall, another thing that we have to emphasize is that unlike in the past, now we live longer. So the life expectancy at birth today is much higher than it used to be, say, 100 years ago. This is mainly due to expanding healthcare and, of course, improvements in the healthcare system around the world. Some other things that are important to mention is the gender and racial inequality. So, for instance, there is still a pay gap between males and females, even races. Finally, of course, we cannot overlook the fact that ending poverty and hunger around the world is yet another important development that has been taking place in the last 50 years or so. Next, we want to address some of the most pertinent developments with reference to changing demographics in further detail. So, first thing we want to look at is aging population. So, aging population actually is an increase in the median age of the population due to mainly declining birth or fertility rates and an increase in the life expectancy at birth. So, in terms of aging population, what you need to know is that in many countries around the world today, the share of young people is decreasing or declining, whereas the share of elderly people is increasing. Now, many economic specialists have called this a demographic time bomb to a number of reasons. Now, declining fertility rates is a rather disturbing trend around the world, which in simple English means that today families or women are having fewer children in comparison with, say, 50 or 100 years ago. One of the good trends, however, is that life expectancy at birth is being increasing. So, in other words, today we live much longer. Also, there is a decline in mortality rates, especially due to infectious diseases around the world. This is, of course, largely due to the expansion of the healthcare system as well as radical improvements with reference to that. Next thing that it's important probably to look at is immigration as well as maybe emigration. Now, immigration is actually a movement of people to a country of which they are not natives or do not have a citizenship to live there legally, whereas emigration is when citizens of a country or natives of a particular country leave the country to go to another region or another country. Finally, we must also talk about some family related changes. What kind of changes? I will give you an example right now. What I've done here actually is just to show you an example of all these pertinent developments. I've used the case of the United States of America. So when we talk about aging population, the US is one of those countries where we see this trend taking place today. For instance, in 1960, the share of people aged between 65 and 84 was only 17 million. Today, in 2020, this number stands at 47 million. So, an almost twofold increase in this population category. Declining fertility rates is also a problem in the United States. About 70 years ago, on average, a woman would give birth to 3.15 babies, whereas today this number stands at 1.7. Luckily, however, there is an increase in life expectancy at birth. So from a little bit less than 70 years in 1960, today on average for both males and females, the life expectancy is almost 80 years of age. As we also mentioned, overall there is a general decrease in the mortality rates. So 70 years ago at birth it stood at around 9.65, whereas today it stands at 8.78. Particular to the United States is the immigrant share growing, which means that, as I already explained, people who are not natives to the United States or do not have a citizenship are actually moving into the country, most of the time attracted by better living conditions. Other important things that have been taking place, as I mentioned, family related changes, for instance, the share of unmarried parents in the United States is growing. That means that actually there are families out there where the wife and the husband are actually not married but they live together. Having already said a couple of words about the aging population around the world, I think it is very important for us as human resource management specialists to look at a particular category part of the general population. This category is the so-called working age population, which is usually defined by the number of people aged between 20 and 64 years. Now, what this graph or figure tries to project is the change in this working age population within the next 40 years. Data is largely based on the OECD countries. OECD stands for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. As of now, there are 34 member states, and almost all of them are actually developed economies. What we can see from this figure is that in most cases, or at least 60% of the OECD member states, there will be a decline in the working age population. Most severely affected will be countries such as South Korea and Lithuania, where in the next 40 years it is projected that the working age population will decline by over 40%. Other countries that will see negative growth include Latvia, Poland, Estonia, Hungary, Slovak Republic. Actually, why I am mentioning only these ones is to emphasize on the fact that most of the states or countries which are projected to experience a negative growth in terms of their working age population are former communist states. Of course, we have some other countries, Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, and even a representative of Latin America. On the other hand, we see a number of states where actually there will be population growth in terms of this category, age between 20 and 64 years. Now, the countries that are expected to enjoy the largest growth with reference to the working age population are Israel, Australia, and Mexico. United States is also one of these countries. If we look at the so-called non-OECD members, so countries that are not part of these 34 states or members, India, Argentina, South Africa, and Indonesia, and even Saudi Arabia are also expected to enjoy growth with reference to this category of the general population. Now, how do we explain the fact that in many countries around the world, the working age population is going to decline in the next 40 years or so? First of all, Korea is a great example, for one, because it's believed to be the purest nation in the world, with more than 98% of the population being purely Korean. If you look at Australia or Israel on the other side, these countries, and of course the United States, for the last few decades or so, they have been enjoying a significant increase in the number of immigrants, which means that people from other countries would move to Israel, Australia, or any other of these states attracted by the better living conditions. So that is one major reason why in these countries we can see growing working age population. Over here in these states, especially the former communist states, we see decline mainly because there is no immigration. On the other side, actually, there is emigration, meaning that locals, so Latvians or Lithuanians, leaving the country and going someplace else, for instance, the United States or Australia or even Israel. Why not? Having already discussed aging population in general and working age population trends in particular, as well as declining fertility rates, it is now natural to look at some of the countries that have been experiencing negative population growth within the last decade or so. In front of you, there is a table with 10 countries. So these are actually the top 10 countries with negative population growth between 2018 and 2019. If you remember in the previous slide, I emphasized that most of the countries that are projected to experience a working age population decline are former communist states. This table exemplifies my statement, as 8 out of these 10 countries are actually former communist states. And I emphasize former because Venezuela is still a communist state. So these members are Lithuania, Latvia, Bulgaria, Romania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Ukraine, and Serbia. Now, why are actually these countries experiencing the largest negative population growth today is because of a number of factors. Number one is the so-called brain drain or emigration. Now, emigration, remember, is actually leaving one's own country to settle down in another country, mainly attracted by better living conditions. Now, what is interesting about most of these former communist states here in the table is that they are currently European Union members. As part of the European Union legislation, any citizen of the European Union is allowed to freely move and work in any member state of the European Union. So what I'm trying to say here is most of the citizens of these former communist and current EU member states are actually moving to Western Europe, countries such as Germany, United Kingdom, Spain, France, and Italy, where the living conditions are much better. Another reason, of course, for the negative population growth is the decline in birth rates, especially in these economies. Now, in this table, which is based on data from year 2019, it is in reversed order, by the way, so from the countries with the highest birth rates all the way down with the countries with the lowest birth rates. As you can see, for instance, Bulgaria is in the top 10 countries with lowest birth rates, 8.5 children or babies per 1,000 people. Other countries that are included here but are not in the table here include some of the small states such as Monaco and Andorra. Portugal, by the way, is one of the European member states that is also fighting declining birth rates. Greece we see here, and Greece we see there as well. Japan, from probably the biggest and the third largest economy in the world, is also troubled by aging population as well as a severe decline in the birth rates. Having already spent a great deal of time on discussing the most important trends with reference to changing demographics, let us now have a look at how these trends are actually impacting human resource management. Now, in most books on HRM, one of the topics that you may come across is the so-called topic of intergenerational conflict, or that is a conflict between the different generations. Now, for those of you who have not taken any business or management related courses in the past, we often like to look at the different generations from a very specific categorization, which actually includes 4 main categories: baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, also known as the millennials, and finally Generation Z. Now, what most HR specialists agree on today is that in the workplace there are often baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z representatives working together. Now, this is in fact what poses one of the greatest challenges to HR specialists, which is managing a multi-generational workforce. Why? Because each of these generations have different perspectives, experiences, values, and expectations. And this is exactly why in teams where we have representatives from different generations working together, we can often talk about the so-called intergenerational conflict. In today's video, you learned a great deal about demographics, the most pertinent and recent trends in terms of demographic changes, as well as some of the challenges that human resource managers face posed by these demographic trends. Since your opinion matters to us, we want to hear from you. And the question that we have for you today is, what are some of the other challenges, so besides the so-called intergenerational conflict, for example, that HRM specialists are facing or would be facing in the near future? Now make sure you use the comment section below. We will be more than glad to hear from you. This is all for today, guys. Thank you once again for watching yet another video on the HRM Academy channel. Do not forget to follow us Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course, don't forget to click on the YouTube subscribe button so that you can stay up to date with the latest videos and other educational content that we will have for you in the near and far future.